Boston. It's been called America's cradle of liberty, the birthplace of freedom and revolution. Indeed, it's this democratic spirit that has given the world some of its most inspiring leaders and most progressive educational institutions. I'm David Celdran, and this is Executive Class. Join us as we explore Boston. Boston is often called the Athens of America. Boston's grand buildings and public squares, her passion for arts and culture, and higher learning, they all recall classical Athenian society. Boston's civic traditions are rooted in the men and women, the so-called pilgrims who first settled on this New England shore close to 400 years ago. Boston was founded in 1630, at first as a British colony. Since then, the city has figured prominently in the history of the United States of America. We're at Boston Common right now, and this is where our tour of historic Boston begins. Boston Common is the oldest public park in the United States. Early Bostonians assembled here to discuss the colony's fate. Today, it is still where most of Boston comes together. The grounds were also used by the British Army, the Redcoats, as a staging ground for raids against rebels. This modern-day patriot is actually our guide. Just one of many costume guides who conduct walking tours of Boston's Freedom Trail. We caught up with him outside the imposing Massachusetts State House. Designed by Bostonian Charles Bulfinch to replace the seat of the British colonial government after independence. The dome was originally made of copper, but was gilded in 23-karat gold in 1997. It remains the state capital and one of Boston's most recognizable landmarks. Our next stop on the Freedom Trail is Park Street Church and its towering steeple. Built shortly after independence, the church would keep the former colony's democratic aspirations alive. The first missions to support the poor and free the slaves began within these walls. If the Freedom Trail has so far failed to ring any bells, the Granary Burying Ground will surely provide some memorable names. Buried beneath are some of the most prominent American patriots, men who lived and died in Boston. Remember Paul Revere, the man credited with a midnight ride? Well, it was he who warned the Redcoats are coming. He's buried here, together with 3 of the original signatories of the Declaration of Independence. Bostonians like John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Robert Treat Paine. Also on the grounds is a memorial to Benjamin Franklin, founding father and native of Boston, although his remains lie buried in Philadelphia. Ben Franklin was a scientist, scholar, politician, and all-around genius. The monument of Franklin stands where he first went to school. Franklin helped draft the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. If you want your own private tour, you can break away from the group and do it yourself. You see, Boston's landmarks are all so accessible, so long as you have a working knowledge of American history. Take that building behind us here, the Old South Meeting House. It was here that 5,000 colonists first met to denounce British colonial rule. That meeting eventually led to the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. This over here is Boston's Old State House. It's the oldest public building in the city. It was also the original seat of the British colonial government. As a symbol of the colonial regime, the State House was a magnet for protests. One unruly mob that gathered here was gunned down by the Redcoats. Boston Massacre, it was called. The beginning of the end of British rule. Boston's Freedom Trail could extend to a dozen more historical landmarks, but you can choose to end your tour right here at the historic Faneuil Hall. Faneuil Hall was the original bastion of freedom of thought and speech, a radical concept during the colonial occupation of the British. Today, however, that tradition has endured, and people come here to denounce and protest anything from the Vietnam War to the Iraqi War. Today, however, locals choose to exercise a different kind of right, the right to have some fun. It's a bit of a tourist trap these days, but landmarks like Faneuil Hall continue to symbolize the civil liberties Bostonians have fought for. Liberties like racial equality. Boston's role in American political history extends well beyond the War of Independence. Boston was also an important base for the movement to abolish slavery. This monument behind me honors the men and officers of the 54th Regiment, the first all-black regiment to fight for the Union Army. The 54th Massachusetts of Colonel Robert Goldshaw will be wiped out in battle. But the struggle for emancipation would find a champion in Boston society. Much of the city's liberal streak can be traced to neighborhoods like Beacon Hill, where Boston's elite reside. Wealthy and highly educated, Boston's aristocracy, the so-called Brahmins, were often the most vocal advocates of democracy. The beautiful red brick row houses and tree-lined lanes attracted the best and brightest, including literary giants Henry James, Louisa May Alcott, and Robert Frost. Beacon Hill and Louisburg Square in particular is where you'll find the best of Boston's Brahmin brownstones. This is where you'll find Boston's creme de la creme. This house in particular is owned by Senator John Kerry. Boston has given America some of its most daring leaders, but there's one name that is recognized all over the world, that of John F. Kennedy. And this is his museum. The JFK Library and Museum, designed by architect I.M. Pei, is a fitting tribute to the 35th President of the United States. It houses the most complete collection of memorabilia, films, and letters of the late President. Now for political junkies, this is really cool stuff. All these memorabilia, original memorabilia from the 1960 Democratic National Convention, where, as we all know by now, John F. Kennedy was chosen to lead the Democratic Party. This next exhibit is a recreation of the legendary Nixon-Kennedy debate. This is what the control room looked like inside the television studio. Historians say this was the first U.S. election decided by TV. Nixon may have been ahead on the issues, but a more presidential-looking Kennedy gave the Massachusetts senator the edge. The rest is history. Kennedy won that election by a whisker and would be on his way to being the most popular American president.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
It was a brilliant speech, perhaps one of the best political speeches in history. It ushered in the era often called Camelot. This now is the Kennedy White House. The rooms were made to resemble the original, so visitors get to revisit key events like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the race to space. If the White House was Camelot, the Kennedys were America's royal family. and Jackie Kennedy, the Queen.
There has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, but he left behind a legacy of hope. 9 years later, and exactly 40 years ago, America would be the first to land a man on the moon. It was Kennedy, after all, that promised to send a man to the moon by launching the Apollo space programs.
Roger, how does it look? Go ahead, please. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
1969, Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin fulfilled that dream. We caught up with Buzz Aldrin at the Boston Symphony Hall, where he joined the Boston Pops concert commemorating the lunar landing. After walking on the moon and reaching the depths of the ocean floor, I asked him on the sidelines what other challenge was left to conquer. What's your next great adventure?
Seeing as I was given the privilege of getting in a French little yellow submarine, going down and seeing the Titanic, okay? And then I got in a Russian nuclear icebreaker to the North Pole. I said, when do I get to the South Pole? So it looks like a couple of Hummers are going to drive there in December, and I'll be on one of them.
All right.
Okay.
Maybe. Jupiter.
Close to 80 years old now, Aldrin is seeking another great leap for mankind and for himself. In Boston, he'll find many like him, people who've shown through their history that there is no barrier that cannot be overcome. When we return, we'll cross the Charles River from Boston on that side to Cambridge on the other side. We'll give you that right after the break. This is the Charles River. It separates Boston and Cambridge. It's a narrow waterway, but the gulf between the two sides is a big one. You see, Boston is where you'll find the seat of government and the financial district. Cambridge, on the other hand, is, well, a different world altogether. But if there's one passion both sides share, it must be sailing. On a summer day like this, expect the students of Cambridge to take their sailboats out for a ride across the Charles' glistening waters. Cambridge is often called Boston's left bank, a reference to Paris's bohemian side left of the Seine. The comparison is an accurate one. Cambridge is youthful and cool, with a large student population fueling this energy. The best place to watch all this? Harvard Square, just outside the gates of Harvard. The wonderful thing about Cambridge is not just the fact that it has the highest concentration of bookshops in America. but that it also has some of the most interesting specialty bookshops as well, like the Grolier Poetry Bookshop. The Grolier Poetry Bookstore in Harvard Square is the most complete bookstore for poetry in the whole United States, with 15,000 volumes in stock. From rare first editions to obscure manuscripts, if it's poetry, it's probably here. You have poetry from practically every part of the world: Welsh, Scottish, Australian, African, Italian. There's Portuguese, Scandinavian, West Indian. If it's poetry, it's probably here. Including a selection of Filipino poets. You know, this of course is a classic in the Philippines. Jose Garcia Villa, a very popular poet back home. Turns out quite popular with Dan Winchell, the shop manager as well. Grolier has been around for 80 years now, making it the oldest continuous poetry bookstore in the States. Today, it's a haven for visiting poets and a proud Cambridge institution. Close by are two other well-loved institutions: the Harvard Bookstore, where you can get used and discounted books, and children's bookshop Curious George. But if it's floors and floors of books you're after, it's hard to beat every Harvard student's preferred source, the Coop. Established in 1882, it's the best-stocked university store anywhere. And since a lot of books are written by Harvard faculty, your chances of meeting the authors here is high. Back out in the sunlight, make time to explore the elegant streets of Cambridge. Some of the most beautiful and most historic homes are along Brattle Street close by. Before the American Revolution, wealthy families loyal to the British Crown used to live here along Brattle Street. However, after independence, these families eventually moved out. Soon enough, a new American elite moved into this neighborhood, including the poet and patriot Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, whose house you see behind me. Longfellow's house was once the headquarters of George Washington. The house is a national landmark and one of the best surviving examples of colonial architecture. Charles Dickens, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Nathaniel Hawthorne were regulars at the Longfellow residence, and it's obvious why. Mansions like these look straight out of a period film. That's because they are little changed from the 1700s and 1800s. Take a detour into Radcliffe Yard for one of the most peaceful spots to cool your heels. Not too long ago, women were barred from enrolling at Harvard. So Radcliffe College was established exclusively for female students. Girl power on campus and a new liberal regime at Harvard changed all that. In 1999, Radcliffe was fully integrated into Harvard. It's a gate most only dream of entering. Founded in 1636, Harvard is the oldest and still one of the most prestigious in America. Immortalized in film classics like Love Story and chick flicks like Legally Blonde, Harvard Yard, the original campus quadrangle, is also one of the world's most recognizable. Because students are off for the summer, it's relatively quiet at Harvard Yard, which makes it the best time to explore the university's oldest dormitories and buildings, like Massachusetts Hall, the oldest on campus, and headquarters of George Washington's Army in Cambridge. Widener Hall, Harvard's main library, and America's oldest and biggest academic library with more than 3 million volumes. And University Hall, where the statue of John Harvard stands, a clergyman whom the school was named after. This is undeniably the most popular law school in the world. The Harvard Law School is legendary not only for its contribution to the practice and history of law, but perhaps more so for the many world leaders that have graduated from this institution, including the US President Barack Obama. Harvard Law is the country's oldest law school and certainly one of the most competitive. As one former dean famously said, "Look to your left, look to your right, because one of you won't be here by the end of the year." The school is a network of various buildings, including its oldest, Austin Hall, and the world's largest and most extensive academic law library, Langdale Hall. Barack Obama first captured America's public imagination when he was elected the first black to head the prestigious Harvard Law Review. The Gannett House behind me was the headquarters of the review where Obama spent most of his days. Now that he's president of the country, the building is undergoing a much-needed makeover. It's been said this is where Obama's political career really began. Harvard may be exclusive, but there's another school 10 minutes up the road in Cambridge that's much harder to get into. It's called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the legendary MIT. Our first stop is the School of Architecture. Because of the high level of research that goes on in these walls, we'll need an insider like Ilak Diaz. Ilak, good to see you.
Thanks for coming, David, and welcome to MIT. It's going to be a long and exciting day ahead.
Ilak is a researcher here, and that's why we have access to this otherwise secretive institution. We make our way down what students call the Infinite Corridor, the longest academic corridor on the planet.
There are 10,000 students here, and as I was saying, that there's 2 professors. Well, there's 2 staff for every 10, so it's quite intensive. It is an Ivy League, but for technology, they accept like 0.003% or something crazy. It's part
of the whole Ivy League, literally.
Yeah.
By virtue of it.
For technology, this is the creme de la creme.
MIT is geek central. Only the brainiest make the grade. Those that do begin and end their student life out here at Killian Court, facing MIT's Great Dome, where admission and graduation ceremonies take place every year. With a cutting-edge architecture and engineering program, it's only natural to find striking modern structures all over the campus. Eero Saarinen's modern chapel is a design classic. MIT is a secular college, so all religions are free to practice here. Saarinen also built the MIT Auditorium, an engineering feat. The entire structure is supported by only 3 pegs. Across campus is another iconic building, Frank Gehry's stunning Ray and Maria Stata Center. The towers seem to crash and collide. The rest seem to bend and flow. These buildings are kept together by webs of glass. MIT, no doubt, is an architectural pilgrim's dream. But it's what's behind these walls and corridors that matter most to MIT staff and students.
So we're now in the underground corridors, and as you see here, it's more sensitive and dangerous. Yeah, I know.
Biological Engineering Division, caution, radioactive material.
You'll see a lot of that, especially the floor below this. It's more toxic and more dangerous. So they're doing a lot of weird science over here.
A lot of weird science going on right here. Take a look at this. No wonder it's underground.
Department of
MIT's corridors are full of surprises, from meeting rooms covered in Frank Stella installations to state-of-the-art robotics labs. There's even a nuclear reactor on campus. You never know who you might bump into at MIT. It could be any one of the 59 Nobel Prize winners on campus, or perhaps the next big inventor. I'm here to meet with 3 young inventors who are going to share with us their revolutionary yet simple products. Hey, how's everything?
Hey, how's it going?
Josh Kargas and Wenxian Hong are MIT engineering students. They've agreed to show me their latest invention, a prototype portable braille labeler that promises to change the way blind people experience the world. Simple solutions to complex problems. Celeste Chudik has developed a cheap and renewable source of heat for poor families without access to fuel. Inventions, be they for outer space or cyberspace, it's what MIT does best. So we're back here at the Dome, and as you said, Elect, this is where every MIT student starts and ends his academic career.
Yeah.
And this is where we end our tour of MIT.
Well,
as well.
you had a great time, and
Hey, yeah.
I guess a start of a great adventure is happening with all the people that you met.
And that's all for this episode of Executive Class. From Boston, Massachusetts, I'm David Celdran. Thanks for watching.